Good afternoon. Happy Juneteenth, everyone. The high-level pledging conference for the humanitarian response in Sudan and the region is wrapping up now. In his remarks, the Secretary General warned that the scale and speed of Sudan's descent into death and destruction is unprecedented, and without strong international support, Sudan could quickly become a locus of lawlessness, radiating insecurity across the region. Mr. Guterres noted that in little more than 2 months, 2 million people have been forced from their homes. Close to 500,000 people have already crossed borders into neighboring countries. He underscored that the only way to end this crisis is through a return to peace and the restoration of civilian rule through the transition to democracy. We will update you on the total funding announced today as soon as possible. Also, speaking at the event, the Undersecretary General for Humanitarian Affairs, Martin Griffiths, warned that needs and operating costs are soaring. He announced an additional allocation of $22 million from the Central Emergency Response Fund to keep urgent humanitarian operations going. And just to flag that the World Food Programme has delivered emergency food assistance to more than 1 million people in Sudan in the 6 weeks since operations resumed on the 3rd of May. You will have seen that this morning, member states adopted an agreement aiming to ensure the conservation and sustainable use of marine biodiversity of areas beyond national jurisdiction, which cover over 2/3 of the ocean. The Secretary General commended the adoption of the agreement and said it pumped new life and hope to give the ocean a fighting chance. The agreement will be open for signature here at headquarters for 2 years, from the 20th of September this year. Oh, that's not good. Okay. I'm not going to say it if there's an echo. Hold 1 second, please. Okay. The agreement will be open for signature here at headquarters for 2 years from the 20th of September this year, the day after the 2023 SDG Summit. It will enter into force after ratification by 60 states. The Secretary General urges all states to spare no effort to ensure that the agreement enters into force and calls on them to act without delay to sign and ratify it as soon as possible. You can find more details online. This morning, the Secretary General also spoke at the 3rd high-level conference of heads of counter-terrorism agencies of member states. He reminded participants that terrorism affects every region of the world and preys on local and national vulnerabilities and the instability of political, economic, and security systems. Through the Global Counter-terrorism Coordination Compact, the Secretary General said, the UN is providing practical, coordinated support to member states and helping countries implement the global counterterrorism strategy. He highlighted 4 areas of focus to build on progress achieved so far. First, he said, we must continue strengthening the central tool in our efforts, the UN Global Counterterrorism Strategy. Second, the Secretary General added, we must focus on the most effective approach to ending this menace, and that is prevention. Third, he said, human rights must be at the heart of our work and can be the greatest weapon we have in fighting terrorism. And the Secretary General concluded with a call for adequate financing of our work. The 3rd Counterterrorism Week continues until Friday. Tor Venesland, the Special Coordinator for the Middle East Peace Process, today said that he was deeply concerned by the Israeli government's decision yesterday to alter settlement planning procedures that have been in place since 1996, which is expected to expedite settlement expansion. He is also alarmed by the anticipated advancement next week of over 4,000 settlement housing units by Israeli planning authorities. We reiterate that the establishment by Israel of settlements in the Palestinian territory occupied since 1967, including East Jerusalem, has no legal validity and constitutes a flagrant violation under international law. Mr. Venesland urged the government of Israel to halt and reverse such decisions, which are a major obstacle to the achievement of the two-state solution and a just, lasting, and comprehensive peace. We also expect a statement by the Secretary General on this later. Abdoulaye Bathily, the Secretary General's Special Representative for Libya, briefed the Security Council today and acknowledged the recent efforts of the 6+6 Committee as an important step forward, though not sufficient to resolve the most contested issues and enable successful elections. He noted that since the committee's last meeting, we've seen a flurry of mixed reactions from Libyan stakeholders on the agreed text, indicating that key issues remain strongly contested. Mr. Pathili said that the main Libyan decision-makers must, acting in a spirit of compromise, put the greater interests of the Libyan people above all else and come to a political agreement on these matters. The special representative told the Security Council that while we all endorse the principle of a Libyan solution as a basis of any effective instrument for sustainable peace and stability, that catchword must not be a slogan to hide an agenda for prolonging the status quo at the expense of the Libyan people's political rights and aspirations for legitimate institutions and prosperity. In Ukraine, the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs continues to support the response to the Kakhovka Dam destruction. 2 interagency convoys traveled today to affected areas, in addition to the ongoing assistance provided by the UN and our partners. In the Kherson region, our teams were in Kalinivske, which is home to nearly 1,700 people who are already facing serious humanitarian needs due to the war. This community used to have a population of 3,400 people before February 2022. We delivered water, hygiene kits, bedding, and shelter material, as well as food for all people in the town for a month. Enough medicine and medical supplies to treat the entire population for 3 months was also delivered. In the Dnipro region, we delivered 8 truckloads of critical humanitarian assistance for at least 4,000 people in 2 communities in the south, where 40,000 people, many of them elderly, have extremely limited access to water because of the destruction of the dam. Our colleagues also provided emergency services, including first aid and counseling, shelter materials, and dignity kits to people affected by the attack yesterday in Odessa and the day before in Kryvyi Rih. While humanitarians in Ukraine are working to provide people with emergency aid they desperately need, we call on the international community to enable this vital operation to continue. So far this year, 8 organizations in the country have received only 26% of the $3.9 billion needed for the humanitarian response. With a worsening situation, we need more funding to be able to respond to the needs. And yesterday, in a statement, the humanitarian coordinator for Ukraine, Denise Brown, said the UN has been engaging with the governments of Ukraine and the Russian Federation regarding effective delivery of humanitarian aid to all people affected by the devastating destruction of the Kakhovka Dam. Ms. Brown noted that the government of the Russian Federation has so far declined our request to access the areas under its temporary military control. She said that the UN will continue to engage to seek the necessary access. Ms. Brown urged the Russian authorities to act in accordance with their obligations under international humanitarian law, stressing that aid cannot be denied to people who need it. Her statement was shared with you. Turning to Yemen, as the eighth meeting of the Supervisory Committee on the Implementation of the Detainees Exchange Agreement has concluded this weekend in Amman, Jordan, the Office of the Special Envoy to Yemen, Hans Grunberg, has announced that it will work with the parties during the coming days to ensure continued engagement and coordination of efforts to achieve progress on this humanitarian file. The Office of the Special Envoy urged the parties to increase their efforts to alleviate the suffering of the detainees and their families as soon as possible. The Secretary General strongly condemned the attack last Friday against the Lubirira Secondary School in Mpondwe in western Uganda, reportedly by the Allied Democratic Forces Group. He said that those responsible for this appalling act must be brought to justice. In a statement, the Secretary General reiterated the importance of collective efforts, including through enhanced regional partnerships, to tackle cross-border insecurity between the Democratic Republic of the Congo and Uganda, and restore durable peace in the area. The full text is online. The UN mission in South Sudan, UNMISS, welcomed today what it called concrete steps taken by the government of South Sudan to pursue accountability and justice for survivors of serious crimes, including sexual violence in Yei, Central Equatoria State. On the 16th of June this year, a general court-martial with technical and financial assistance by the United Nations concluded its work in Yei River County and delivered verdicts in 14 cases. 11 members of the South Sudan People's Defense Forces accused of serious crimes were convicted, stripped of their ranks, sentenced to up to 10 years imprisonment, and required to pay compensation to survivors. UNMISS provided funding for victims and witnesses to receive psychosocial support, as well as interpretation services, food, accommodation, and transport during the course of the General Court-Martial. And today is the International Day for the Elimination of Sexual Violence in Conflict. This year focuses on technology and the digital divide. In his message for the day, the Secretary General reaffirmed that accessible technology can alert people to danger and enable abuses to be documented and verified as a first step towards accountability. Building on the outcomes of the Transforming Education Summit in September 2022, the Secretary General has today announced the establishment of a high-level panel on the teaching profession and appointed its 2 co-chairs. The panel will be co-chaired by Ms. Kirsti Kaljulaid, the former President of the Republic of Estonia, and retired Justice Paula May Weeks, the former President of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. Supported by a joint UNESCO-ILO Secretariat, the panel will draw together expertise from ministries of education and labor, teachers, students, representatives of teacher unions, as well as representatives of civil society, the private sector, and academia. The full list of panel members will be shared with you. And finally, we've had a further boost to the organization's coffers in the form of a payment from Jordan. The total number of fully paid up member states is now 118. That's it for me. Are there any questions? Yeah, James.
Yes, so fresh violence again in Jenin, another Israeli raid, resulting in 5 Palestinians killed, including a 16-year-old child, and as many as 91 Palestinians wounded. What is the Secretary General's reaction?
Well, the Secretary General shares the views of his special coordinator, Tor Venesland, who said just over the past hour that he was deeply concerned by today's events in Jenin, following an Israeli security forces operation and the ensuing exchange of fire, which resulted in 5 Palestinians killed, including a child, and some 60 Palestinians and 7 Israeli forces wounded, at the very least. I believe those numbers are going up as we speak. Such escalations threaten to plunge the region deeper into a deadly crisis. Mr. Venesland said that all sides must refrain from actions that would further escalate the situation and take steps to re-engage on a political path.
So you want de-escalation, but at the same time you read the other Tor Venesland's statement about the Israeli government's, trying to basically new policies that will make it easier for settlements. That's clearly going in the wrong direction. What does the Secretary General think the diplomacy on this should look like? Because you issue statements here regularly calling for de-escalation when most of the violence is coming from one side, from the Israelis. You have a monthly meeting in the Security Council that says the same thing every month. Is it time to move this to another level? Is it time for the quartet to meet again? Is it time perhaps for the Secretary General to start picking up the phone and speaking to the Israeli Prime Minister and the Palestinian President?
Well, the Secretary General has been involved in talking to a range of leaders on this, and he will continue to do so. From his standpoint, one of the crucial things is that people need to abide by international law. And we've made it very clear and repeatedly clear that settlements in the Palestinian territory, in the occupied Palestinian territory, are not legally valid and constitute a flagrant violation of international law. I do expect we will have a statement in the Secretary General's name on this later today.
But there are no consequences for Israel repeatedly breaching international law.
There are always consequences in different fields, depending upon what you deem as a consequence. Is that enough to stop this from going on? Clearly, at this point, it has not been, and we are working with all of our partners to see what can be done to make sure that Israel abides by its obligations. Yes, Betul.
Farhan, thanks. USG DiCarlo was in Moscow last week on the 15 and 16, as far as I remember, but I'm not sure if you put out a statement. Can you tell us who she met, what she talked about, whether she raised the grain deal? And also, does the SG have any reaction to President Putin's intention to convene African nations to discuss the grain deal? Thank you.
Well, certainly we welcome efforts by all groups, including concerned African nations, to work together in moving forwards with the grain deal. We did put out a note, I believe, over the weekend, I think on Saturday, about Ms. DiCarlo's travels. But certainly she did hold consultations, including with the Deputy Foreign Minister, Sergei Vershinin, and with the chairman of the Federation Council Committee on International Affairs. And I can confirm that, that in all of our meetings, the UN's clear, consistent, and principled position regarding the full-scale invasion of Ukraine by the Russian Federation was upheld. So she did discuss that, and I believe all of the various other aspects. Yes, Edie.
Just as a quick follow-up on that, do all those other various aspects include the Black Sea Grain Initiative, since she met with Vershinin, who's
Yes.
one of the key Russian interlocutors?
Yes, the Black Sea Grain Initiative, and of course the Memorandum of Understanding regarding Russian exports of food and fertilizer.
My question is, does the Secretary General have any comment on U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken's meeting with China's President Xi Jinping and their agreement to stabilize relations?
Yes, we certainly welcome the meeting between the U.S. and Chinese foreign ministry officials. Any dialogue between the United States and China on this is crucial to improving coordination on a wide range of major issues. Yes, yes, please.
Two questions, Farhan. First, during in the statement published by the coordinator, Ms. Braun, on the issue of the dam, he said Russia so far declined the request of the UN to access the area under the Russian military control. So does that mean that the UN engineers still cannot reach the site of this dam?
Yes, I'd refer you to what also has been said by Denise Brown in her statement yesterday.
Yes.
We do not have the access that we need to have.
So two follow-ups. First, does the UN got the reason from Russian Federation why? And second, in this statement, he said the UN will continue to do all it can to reach all people, including anywhere they are, no matter where they are. So if Russia declined the UN's access to those areas, how would the UN do that?
Well, we will continue to be in touch with our Russian Federation counterparts, and they do have an obligation under international humanitarian law to provide the access that's needed. We are willing to go to all areas of Ukraine, regardless of who is in control. But of course, we have to do that while abiding by our own obligations under international law.
So you didn't answer my two questions. First, why any reasons Russia gave to the United Nations? Why?
I think you'd need to ask the Russians what their reasoning is. From our standpoint, there needs to be access. Sherwin, and then I'll turn it over to you.
Farhan, is there any reaction from the Secretary General to the African Peace Initiative? Meetings, of course, in Kyiv and St. Petersburg with the leaders of both countries, led by South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa, including the presentation of a 10-point peace plan from the African mediation team. What is the Secretary General's reaction?
We welcome efforts by all nations, including the African nations, to work to de-escalate tensions between Ukraine and the Russian Federation. We'll see what progress can be made on this particular initiative, but certainly it's a very positive sign that they are involved in efforts to try to bring the countries closer together.
Is the Secretary General expecting a briefing from President Cyril Ramaphosa in the aftermath of this visit? And does he see a greater role for himself in consolidating the various peace initiatives we now have on the table? There is a Ukrainian peace plan, there is a Chinese peace plan, there is a African peace plan now. What is his role in consolidating all these initiatives?
Well, I think you've heard from the Secretary General. He is in touch regularly with all of the key players internationally, trying to see when the conditions are right for his own particular involvement. Whenever it is helpful for him to take any of these issues forward, he will do so.
When, though, are those conditions going to be right? What are the conditions he's waiting for? Because he has said that he expects some sort of opening to happen this year in terms of negotiations. What are the conditions he's looking for?
When he believes it's right, you will know it. Yes, please. Volodymyr first, and then, yeah.
Is it correct to say that you don't know the reason why Russians do not accept, allow the humanitarian missions to the occupied territories?
No, we've been in contact with them. I will not, it's not up to me to explain what their reasoning is. From our standpoint, we have the right to have access to those areas in conformity with our own obligations under international law. Abdelhamid first, and then we'll go back over. So Abdelhamid.
Thank you, Farhan.
You'll need to please boost his volume. Again, we're having some volume problems from him. Hold on 1 second. Try again.
How is that?
Yeah, good.
Yeah. I want to follow up with the question. First, are you aware that the Israeli used in military actually helicopters in Jenin? Isn't that an escalation that is not fair to call on both parties to de-escalate? One party using the air force against the defensive civilians in Jenin?
I didn't quite hear you precisely, but I think I got the gist of it. On that, in terms of where the obligations lie, I would also refer you to the statement that has just recently been issued by the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights concerning Jenin, and that's out now. Ivan?
Second, can I have a second question?
Sure.
Okay, in his statement, Mr. Paul Winston mentioned that he's concerned about the Israeli decision to alter settlement planning procedures that have been in place since 1996. That is very tricky language. Why is he tolerating the procedure that is in place in 1996?
I don't really comment on the precise word. Please, let me continue. I don't comment on the precise wording that Mr. Venesland is using. Certainly, he is describing the situation using the language, including the legal language that we continue to use in describing the situation on the ground. Yvonne?
Thank you, Farhan. My question is just seeking clarification on something the Secretary General said last week on the Declaration on Human Fraternity for World Peace and Living Together, this document co-authored by the Pope and the Grand Imam. Secretary General praised this document very highly, but this document expressly condemns abortion, putting it in the same category as genocide, terrorism, and human organ trafficking. I'm just wondering if the Secretary General also supports that sentiment.
No, his support for the concept of a platform to bring together the world's religions is there without being an endorsement of all of the specific proposals by the religions. Those are their views, not the views of the United Nations.
Okay, so he doesn't endorse that line in the document.
No, nor is it an endorsement of any of the specific parts of that. The endorsement is about the efforts to bridge divides between religions. Dulcie and then Pam.
Thanks. I just want to know if we could get someone from the peacekeeping department to come here and explain to us the repatriation of the 60 Tanzanian troops who were sent back home for sexual abuse and other problems, because you gave us some information, but it's pretty scant. And also, what briefly is the process for the UN to withdraw the peacekeeping mission from Mali? Thanks.
On Mali, I mean, that is an issue, as you know, where the mandate of the mission, as with all of our missions, is in the hands of the members of the Security Council. So if there is any need to change the mandate, it'll be up to the Council to determine that. The current mandate, as you know, goes on till the end of this month.
Well, how generally does the process work in the Security Council?
As you're aware, they receive reports from the Secretary General. The Secretary General has, in fact, reported to the Security Council about the situation in Mali, and now it's up to the members of the Council to determine where they want to go with the proposals that they have seen.
Can you answer my question about the Tanzanians?
About the Tanzanians? Hold on one second. Well, first of all, what is your specific question about that? I have some.
I asked if someone from the peacekeeping department could come here and talk to us in detail. About the
We'll
case.
see whether someone can talk to you in detail. I mean, we ourselves have some information. If you have any questions right now, I can handle those.
I think it's important to hear from the peacekeeping department about this.
Okay, all right. I will see whether any of them intends to do that. Wait, Stefano?
Thank you, Farhan. The Secretary General already expressed horror on what happened last week in close to Greece when about 500, they say, refugees or migrants died. Now, does the UN is going to do an investigation about what really happened? Because Greek authorities are saying that the ship didn't want be rescued, or they were like going toward Italy, so they didn't intervene. Somebody else said that was 7 hours stuck in the water without help. So in these cases like this, over 500 people dead, is the UN going to intervene and doing an investigation to know the truth what happened?
At this stage, I believe the investigation will be handled by the competent national authorities. In other words, the authorities of Greece. Pam?
Thank you, Farhan. The Secretary General made comments this morning before the adoption of the otherwise known as High Seas Treaty. Do you expect an event around September 20th on the opening of the signing? And what was his reaction to Russia distancing itself, even though it did adopt the treaty? Thank you.
Well, certainly the Secretary General was very pleased with the adoption of the treaty. He believes that the adoption is itself a strong victory for multilateralism, and it will go a significant way, once this treaty is adopted, towards protecting biodiversity in the world's oceans. Once it's ratified, yes. So once it reaches the ratification threshold of 60, that will be a tremendous step forward. But as it is, this was a very significant accomplishment today. And yes, as you know, whenever there are treaty events during the UN General Assembly week, we let you know about those arrangements. But there will be different signings, and we'll keep you posted on that in September.
He mentioned the ratification necessity by countries. Will he be working any of the delegations to sign and ratify? Thank you.
We certainly are encouraging countries, including through our Office of Legal Affairs, to ratify this treaty as soon as they can. Okay, now we can go to. Oh, actually, Linda hasn't had a question first, and then we'll go to round two. Yeah.
Thank you, Farhan. You may have answered this in the past, but because it goes back to about a week ago, when the DPRK was voted into on the board of the World Health Organization. And I was wondering at that point or since, has the SG had any comments about that appointment, given the humanitarian conditions there?
Well, you're aware of our concerns about the humanitarian conditions in the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. That said, of course, appointments to boards are done by member states, and those are outside of our hands. Betul?
Thanks, Farhan. First, a follow-up on Ukraine. Can you remind us when the last time was for the SG to either talk to the Russian president or the Russian foreign minister, since the deadline for the Black Sea grain deal is nearing? And also on Yemen, has the UN team started the ship-to-ship transfer for the oil on the Zafir tanker? Thanks.
That should be happening before the end of this month. But yes, the ships have moved in place, and the Endeavour is ready to perform its tasks. So that's happening. Now, regarding the Secretary General, I can't remember off the top of my head, but as you know, in recent weeks, he has been in touch with senior officials in Ukraine and the Russian Federation. And of course, on his side, on his behalf, you've also had Martin Griffiths and Rebecca Greenspan dealing with them on key issues. And indeed, I believe Ms. Greenspan was in Moscow the week before last, talking to the officials in the foreign ministry on this. Sherwin.
Thanks, Farhan. Denise Brown's statement says the government of the Russian Federation has so far declined our request to access the areas under its temporary military control. Of course, this flies in the face of words coming out of the Kremlin from President Putin that any peace must allow for new realities on the ground. Is that position from the Russian president a non-starter for the UN?
I would just say that our position is reflected in the relevant resolutions of the General Assembly on this, which include, of course, a reaffirmation of the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine.
Which translated means Russia would have to return all the seized territory of Ukraine back to the Ukraine.
I would just refer to what I've just said. Yes, Deshi.
Speaking of the High Sea Treaty, SG said it's a victory, which reminds me of the Fukushima contaminated nuclear water. Does the UN think it should be concerned that these water could also threaten the marine biodiversity of the high seas?
Regarding the situation in Fukushima, I believe the International Atomic Energy Agency put out a press release about the latest situation at the Fukushima nuclear plant a few weeks ago, and I just refer you to what the IAEA is saying.
They said it's rather transparent, and we know that there would be a final report on this in late June, which would be released. But it seems the Japanese government, I mean, they have already started testing the release procedure. I remember the actress Jane Fonda here. She said, "Dogs don't poop in their kennel. We're pooping in our kennel," concerning the sea. Does the UN think releasing all those contaminated water is an act of pooping our kennel?
There's always concerns about how to safely deal with waste, including nuclear waste, and I would just refer you to what the International Atomic Energy Agency has said on this.
So it might not be pooping, it's peeing?
You know, I don't really know how to properly engage with a metaphor like that. I give you credit for innovativeness. Yes.
Yes, Farhan, I've got a new question and then a couple of follow-up loose ends. So Alexei Navalny, the Russian opposition leader, is now facing a new trial on a charge of extremism, this one with no media and be held behind closed doors. What's the Secretary-General's reaction?
We just reiterate our previous concerns. We've made clear our concerns, both from the Secretary-General and from the High Commissioner for Human Rights, about the situation of Mr. Navalny and the need for him to have all of his basic rights, including his rights to due process.
Back to the meeting between Secretary Blinken and President Xi and other senior Chinese officials. One thing that wasn't achieved was discussed was reopening military-to-military contacts between the two. Does the Secretary General think that sort of military hotline contacts are useful and would be good to de-escalate any potential problem?
I think that those are issues that we will leave to the relevant officials in the United States and China to work with each other on.
And finally, the quite strong statement you read out earlier on from Denise Brown, yet this has been the situation since the beginning of the war for 15 months. And she seems to be the only UN official who ever says anything about it. Martin Griffiths seems to dodge the issue. The Secretary-General doesn't really say much about the Russians not allowing the UN to have any access at all to that occupied territory. I mean, are you pulling your punches because you're frightened about the grain deal?
I would say that when Denise Brown speaks, she speaks for the system, including for all of us.
But it would have more power if it came from the voice of the Secretary General condemning Russia for not letting the UN into those areas.
She is our senior humanitarian person on the ground on this, and she speaks for all of us when she puts out the statement that she puts out.
Final related point to this. Ukraine is saying that 8 villages have been retaken in the last 2 weeks. Does the UN have confirmation of that? And is the UN making preparations, as these are now not in areas that you're not allowed to go in by Russia, but are in areas that are controlled by Ukraine? Is it making preparations potentially to go to these areas?
We stand ready to go to different areas once it is safe to do so. We'll have to see what the conditions on the ground are like. Have a good afternoon, everyone. Bye.